welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at the concept of space in visual art. And our primary goals today is number one, to understand the term space. And number two, we need to be able to understand that space is really about understanding spatial relationships. And today we're going to talk about some of the strategies that are used in terms of placing figures or objects within space in order to create those spatial relationships. So we need to think about space in two different ways. Number one, we need to think about two-dimensional space, which is flat. All right, we have two planes. We have the length and the width. And if we take a look at mathematics, right, you guys probably are familiar with this with the Cartesian plane and plotting different points on a two-dimensional grid, right? We refer to these as our X and Y coordinates. We don't really have that kind of overly sophisticated way of thinking about two-dimensional space in visual art, but it's a good analogy and a good way of kind of thinking about how we are placing our objects and how close or how far the subjects are from each other within the frame of the image. Okay, so we also have two different concepts of space in a two-dimensional plane. Number one is the positive space, and number two is the negative space. Okay, so in this very flat image, right, we can see that there is the black, right? And this is kind of what we are intended to look at because it comes forward to us with the detail. And this is the positive space within the image, the tree and the silhouetted ground down at the bottom. The negative space is all of the stuff around that particular object, and even the negative spaces are the little windows or openings that are within the tree itself, right? We can see some of these little openings here, and some of them are really, really small. And by balancing out that idea of positive and negative space in a two-dimensional work, right, we're able to create a little bit more interest and detail in the pieces that we are creating. Imagine if this were just one solid block of black. It wouldn't be nearly as interesting if these little windows were not present. Okay, so we have positive and negative space. And we also have three-dimensional space, and this one's a little bit more complicated, right? So here we have the two-dimensional plane that we were talking about earlier, but we also have the three-dimensional plane where we now introduce what's called the Z-axis, right? And this gives us that sense of depth. And this is where space really becomes, I think, really interesting when it comes to visual art, because there's all sorts of different conventions that can be used in order to help us place our subject matter in and along this Z-axis. And in fact, we have an entire video and PowerPoint image or slide deck that is specifically providing strategies for how to achieve that sense of depth in our work. Okay, so we have two-dimensional space, which is flat, and we have three-dimensional space, which has depth. Okay, so here we go. So let's get a little bit more involved. Okay, and the one thing that we do need to be thinking about is when we're doing this is that different styles of art are also going to be implementing space differently. Okay, and again, we're going to have another video that is specifically about the different styles of art if this is a term that is unfamiliar to you. Okay, so we have two different images here, both of them from a series of graphic novels called A Girl Called Echo, and they are utilizing space in two completely different ways. So the one on the left for volume one, right, this is what we would call a two-dimensional space, right? There is very, very little detail in terms of the background. It's very flat, right? We have the kind of silhouetted, stencilized vision of Echo here, right? And it's basically here's Echo and here's a background, and that's it. With the third volume, right? This is one of my favorite graphic novel covers, because even though it's still kind of flat, it utilizes stylization in a way that's very similar to the first cover, but by using different, I'm going to say like shades or values of oranges, right? And scale, we're able to create a sense of depth in this work where we know that Echo is up near the front, right? And in the midground, there are some of the gravestones. In the background, there is a church, and it also looks at the very, very back here on the horizon line, it looks as though there is a fire. And by playing around with some of these different conventions that we'll talk about in our other video, we're able to create that sense of depth, right? That there's something near and that there is also something far. Okay, so let's take a look at the idea of how figures interact within their space. Okay, so what we're really doing in this video is thinking about how forms, three-dimensional objects, can exist within a three-dimensional space. So in order to do this, we need to be thinking about two different types of forms. Number one, okay, are closed forms, right? And this is important because these are kind of tight-bodied, right? And they are kind of controlled or constrained, right? And if we take a look at this particular panel in this graphic novel, right, everything is kind of close together. There's nothing that extends out of the body, right, or away from the body, so to speak. Whereas open forms have that sense of extension, and they also create that sense of action. And we can see that in the way that both the dog as well as the figure here have different limbs that are outstretched, going into and extending into that occupied space.